granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
So far, the BBC's personal apology to President Trump is a big secret. I can't find anything about it on the internet. All I can find is Samir Shah's letter to the Parliamentary Committee for Culture, Media and Sport. I'll read that to you. And then at the end of it, I'm going to cut it down to something that's a bit more bite-sized. So if you want to get to the bite-size, go to the last couple of minutes of the video. But meanwhile, let's go through what Samir Shah says, because it's sort of interesting. So before I start on that, I'll tell you that I'm Granniopteryx. Please like this video. Click the like button. Please share the video and please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, remember they drop subscriptions. They have clean outs and looking for bots, and occasionally, in fact very frequently, catch humans as well. All right, if you want to contribute financially to my channel, that's quite nice. All the links whereby you might do that are in the description. All right, to work. Let's have a look at Samir Shah's letter to Parliament. I've just switched the light on, I hope you've noticed. All right, let's get on with this. Samir Shah, the chairman of the BBC, sent this letter not to President Trump, but to the Parliamentary Culture, Media and Sport Committee, because the BBC is responsible to Parliament. So he sent this letter to them first and apologising to them, really. And he says here, the editing of President Trump's speech on January the 6th has attracted significant attention. To paraphrase Emperor Hirohito in his surrender broadcast to the Japanese nation after the terrible events in 1945, I'd say that what Samir Shah should have said is that the BBC's overweening arrogance has resulted in a situation not necessarily to the BBC's advantage. This issue was the subject of discussion at EGSC. He was using BBC jargon here. For your elucidation, I have translated that. The BBC Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. Yeah, they do have an Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. The only problem is that the committee is a BBC committee. So it's like marking its own homework, isn't it? In January 2025. So this was brought up months ago and again in May. So it was brought up months ago as well. There was concern expressed by members of the committee, as well as Mr. Prescott, of the way the programme was edited. However, the EGSC also heard from BBC News that the purpose of editing the clip was to convey the message of the speech made by President Trump so that Panorama audience could better understand how it had been received by President Trump's supporters. OK, now there's an awful lot in that sentence. And the first one is that he has said here, or rather BBC News said, and that's Deborah Turness's patch. And so, I don't know, BBC News, it might have been Deborah Turness herself. The purpose of editing the clip was to convey the message of the speech made by President Trump. So it meant it was a boiled down version of what the essence of the speech was, which Panorama had done to make things simpler for the idiot Panorama audience. That's what that means. So the EGSC were a little concerned about the edit, but then they were reassured when BBC News said that, well, we had to make things simple for the Panorama audience, you see. And then the EGSC thought, well, yeah, obviously our audience are just a bunch of idiots, so we have to keep things simple. Yep. So that's the first thing. Panorama boiled it down to make it simple enough for you, the viewer, to understand. Now, the purpose of editing was to convey the message of the speech. Now, what was the message of the speech? Well, it was obvious that we're going to march to the Capitol and we're going to fight. That was the message of the speech as perceived by whoever edited the Panorama programme. It was their interpretation of the message of the speech, not the message of the speech. So the people at the EGSC listened to this and heard, one, that the audience were idiots that needed, sort of spoon-fed baby formula of a message. And the other thing was that the Panorama team had decided what the message of the speech was. This issue was considered and discussed as part of a wider review of the BBC's US election coverage commissioned by the committee. So then they pulled their beards, if they had beards, and then they commissioned another committee. And I think that's called kicking the ball down the road, isn't it? And so they commissioned a committee rather than handling it as a specific programme complaint. There was one guy there who had somehow been associated with the Conservative Party. Hang on a minute, I'm just going to check on his name. Yeah, right, his name was Robbie Gibb, and he is being blamed now by various members of the BBC, like Maitlis and those guys, he's being accused of spearheading a plot against the BBC because he had been associated in some way. Yeah, he'd previously served as Theresa May's Director of Communications and had been involved with GB News. I don't know in what way he's involved with GB News. There was concern expressed by members of the committee about the way the programme was edited, so I'm assuming Robbie Gibb was one of them. But in the end, they commissioned a review of the BBC's election coverage. So they didn't stand up and come out with it right there. I mean, if Gibb wanted to bring down the BBC, all he would have had to have done was make an announcement then and there to the various news channels. If he's involved in GB News, then he could have given the story straight to GB News at the time. But he didn't. Apparently, he's still a good committee man, and he let them commission a review rather than handling it as a specific complaint, which was actually what should have been done. Given that it had not attracted significant audience feedback, that is, a lot of people hadn't started writing in saying this is wrong, because it was such a good edit that, well, it would have fooled me. I mean, if I'd have seen that, that's what I would have thought. I'm not going to sit through an entire hour of President Trump's rambling speeches, some of which are sort of interesting, but I've got better things to do with my life, as most people have round here. And since we aren't directly voting in any way on this, obviously it's not going to be as relevant as the latest nonsense from the Labour Party or whatever. So people aren't going to compare the speeches. They're not going to see the long one. They'll see the Panorama potted one, and it doesn't look like it's been edited. It would have fooled me, and I've got something of an eye for editing. It was brilliantly done. So why should it have attracted significant audience feedback? Anyway, they raised in the review, they relayed to the Panorama team, and then Mr. Shah says, with hindsight, it would have been better to take more formal action. Again, how beautifully understated that is. There should have been blood in the BBC corridors by that time, and we know that. And now the BBC knows that. Since the publication of Mr. Prescott's memo, this issue has led to over 500 complaints. These are now being dealt with in the normal way. Yeah, well, if I know the BBC, the normal way is... this. Right. OK, it has also prompted further reflection by the BBC. Yeah, the only thing it's prompted actually is their staring at the inside of their empty purses. The conclusion of that deliberation is that we accept that the way the speech was edited did give the impression of a direct call for violent action. And then he says the BBC would like to apologise for that error of judgment. Error of judgment. Error of judgment. That was not an error of judgment. It was judgment, and the judgment was erroneous, but it was not an error of judgment, if you get what I'm saying. OK, now for the big reveal. I assume some of you didn't have time to go through all of this letter. So I've done a boiled down version of what Samir Shah said in his letter. Hang on a minute. Yeah, in his letter to the Parliamentary Committee for Culture, Media and Sport. And here it is. You see, I haven't changed any of the words. I've just boiled it down. I want to be absolutely clear about that. President Trump's speech on January the 6th has attracted significant audience feedback and a direct call for violent action. The BBC would like that. Well, they said that. Look, it's their words. Absolutely. I've just shortened it a little bit so you'd understand it more clearly. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.